Please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good morning. And if you could just show that all 7 commissioners are present, please. Is there any correspondence?
None that I'm aware of. Mayor.
Okay, great. We're going to move right into the city manager's report, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Hopefully everyone saw the wonderful fireworks we had this past Wednesday, July 3rd. I'd like to thank all of those who helped make the show safe and very enjoyable. Special thank you to Zambelli Pyrotechnical Team, the Rehoboth Beach Police Department, especially Lieutenant Jamie Riddle, who coordinates law enforcement logistics with much planning and effort, Delaware State Police, Rehoboth Beach Volunteer Fire Department, all the auxiliary fire departments who participated, Rehoboth Beach Patrol, Parking Department, the Streets Department did a fabulous job and then cleaned up, and that was evident the next day. The Rehoboth Beach Bandstand, DelDOT, United States Coast Guard, DENREC, Delaware Fire Marshal, Sussex County EMS, DART, and the Jolly Trolley. And a big thanks to the community of Rehoboth Beach for its support. It was, again, a great night. And we also had a surprise for those who can see the lake with 2 streaming fountains showing their colors of red, white, and blue. So that's a permanent fixture now that we'll be able to change colors for. We have a meeting scheduled with business owners on July 11th to explain the stormwater sampling and grease trap inspections that are being conducted this summer. It's a follow-up to the initial sampling done last year to help identify sources of bacteria. And it's being paid partially through a surface water matching planning grant. Total cost for the city is $27,500. The stormwater sampling and grease trap inspections are scheduled for July and August. Of course, our consulting engineers, GHD, will be out with staff. And we have public outreach plan for all restaurants that will be inspected and a pre-meeting for city staff to meet with the restaurants to explain the sampling project and to answer questions. This coming Saturday, we have a town hall for the proposed changes to the water and sewer rates. That'll be Saturday, July 13th at 10 a.m. right here in the Commissioner's Room. Public is invited to attend, and it will feature information on the proposed changes to water and sewer rates from the Utility Rates Working Group recommendations. The format of the town hall will be similar to the last presentation in this room with public comment, questions, and answers. To better understand current and future conditions, the city is updating its comprehensive development plan, which is the state-mandated principal document outlining the city's goals and policies regarding future growth and management of all of its resources. Public input is vital in shaping the future, and 3 separate survey options, one for community, one for business, and then one for visitors, have been provided to gain public input. The online surveys can be found on the city's website, or those who wish to fill out the survey in written format, paper copies are available at City Hall and can be returned to City Hall as well. Along those lines of the comprehensive development plan, a workshop is scheduled on Saturday, July 20th. The subject will be sea level rise and related environmental and economic impact by retired longtime DENREC employee Tony Pratt. A second CDP workshop for discussion on the issue of mixed-use housing and zoning in the commercial district will be held on Saturday morning, August 3rd. And more information on both of these will be posted soon. Starting today, July 8th through August 28th, there will be nighttime temporary lane closures for the Rehoboth Drawbridge. DelDOT's contractor will be sandblasting and painting the underside of the drawbridge, Residents can anticipate noise during this portion of the work. There will be single nighttime lane closures from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday evenings. Flaggers will be on site to direct motorists. Part of the bridge rehabilitation project involves replacing the sidewalks on both sides of the bridge. While the sidewalk on one side of the bridge is being replaced, pedestrians and cyclists may utilize the other side of the sidewalk on the bridge. And additionally, DelDOT announced that there will be a nighttime lane closure on Route 1 northbound and southbound on the bridge over the Lewis-Rehoboth Canal for preparation work related to the upcoming bridge closure this winter. Work is scheduled there from July 15th through September 23rd. Included in this year's CIP, Capital Improvement Plan, is the Delaware Avenue Stormwater Pipe Rehabilitation, and this bid advertisement will be in the press next week. A pre-bid meeting is scheduled for July 24th, and the work involves lining the pipe under the boardwalk between Wilmington and Brooklyn and lining the pipe on Delaware Avenue from the boardwalk to First Street. That's it. Thank you, Madam.
Just a real quick question. Is the paving schedule for the year, is that published online? And if so, can you just tell me where it is?
The paving schedule is being developed.
It's being developed?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. You'll just let us know when it's online, right? Okay, that'll happen in the fall, right?
Yes.
Correct? Okay, thank you.
And I have a question on the CDP surveys that have gone out, the 3 versions that you referenced. It's great to see that those are out and that they're being circulated widely. The criticism that I've heard, and then I think it translates to a question or two, is that they're very long surveys. There are 30-some questions, up to 40 maybe. So if a person is taking the survey, there's no indication what % of it they're through or how many questions there are. So I've had people say, well, I got to question 10, 15, 20, and how long is this going to go? And if I bail out of it now, is it one of those kind of online features that when I go back into it as I have time, it'll bring me right back into it? I don't have an answer for that.
I think that is the case.
Okay.
So I can check on that, but I think
okay.
that is the case.
Because that would be helpful, given the length of it. And then,
Planning Commission, worked hard and long
oh,
with
I
the
understand.
consultant on that, and actually culled some of those questions to make the finished product.
And I understand that we've all had some input into, what is the best subject matter to be going after and so on. So it is great to see it out there, but that is a concern, the length and the amount of time that it may take an individual. If a person stops at question 20, and can they send it in at that point? If they choose to not get back to it because they've become frustrated with the length of the time or something.
Yeah, I think, we'll take whatever anyone can tolerate, if they can't finish it, yeah.
Okay.
Well, it seems to me you could preface the survey by saying, this is a 30-question survey, so they know ahead of time.
And it doesn't
So
say, say that at the
yeah, I mean,
beginning.
but with SurveyMonkey, you could probably go in there and change that now. So for people who are starting to take the survey, it
That's a
should
good
be.
point, Pat.
Yeah.
It would be helpful, I think, to people as they started. I know there's going to be
Sure.
35 questions. You make sure that I have time to do this
Right,
properly.
Right.
And typically, you'd see there's 35 questions, it takes approximately 30 minutes or whatever it is. And I think people then can plan appropriately. So that text can be easily modified, I believe, yeah.
Sharon, could you expound on the 2 fountains at Silver Lake? Is that a project of the city, DENREC, SOLA, and who's bearing the cost for installation and maintenance?
The city, actually, it's a city project. We started this the beginning of the year. The city contracted with Envirotech to install the fountains, and they were purchased through the funds of the city. We received permits from DENREC in order to be out there.
Was that in the 5-year CIP or the budget?
It was not in the budget.
Thank you.
And City Manager Lynn, I just wanted to share with you the 2 fountains that have been installed in Silver Lake. I can personally say very, very, very popular feedback, especially from folks who have had the opportunity with so much traffic in town over July 4th to see them. And I got personal calls from many residents, especially on the south side, saying that it was such a, not only an aesthetic improvement, but for water quality. So I'm very hopeful that as things move forward, there's a plan or a possible plan to expand that to include Lake Girard, so that that lake is not forgotten if indeed it needs it, and maybe opportunities for additional ones on the Silver Lake area. So it was extraordinary. I've never, ever in 6 years gotten that much positive feedback on anything. So it was wonderful.
People love it, yes.
I loved it.
Heard that all weekend.
And just a clarification, Commissioner Mills, it was not in the CIP, it was in the budget in the Streets Department. So part of the issue, as you might know from years, we had those trees floating out there, and it was very difficult, sometimes even dangerous for city staff to row that platform out in a sort of a boat, which we don't have, and use that. So these are put up securely. There's little liability with them, and they were constructed with care.
So is there a possibility to have them in Lake Girard?
Certainly, we can put them everywhere.
Well, that would do it.
Well, I vote for one in Lake Girard at least.
Yeah.
I recall the cost being somewhere in, for the installation costs, being somewhere in the $10,000 range.
Thank you. Anything, City Solicitor?
Only to mention that I owe all of you a few ordinances, one of them being the administrative variance ordinance. I also owe you an ordinance on the smoking ban areas being expanded. So I'm working on those, just wanted you to know I didn't forget about them.
Great.
Yeah, the only thing I would mention is if you can include line numbers in the future, I think it's helpful.
Yes. Did I not in one recently?
Apparently not.
I think that was the case. Oh, yeah, so the ordinance that's on today is not drafted by me, but it should have, yeah. So that it does not have line numbers, you're right.
It's
Okay.
just, yeah.
But yes, I will.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move right into a presentation of the mural proposal on the east side of the Convention Center. As Sharon will take care of that.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a little background. On April 8th, I announced very exciting news that the city had partnered with the Rehoboth Art League for a mural installation on the east side exterior wall of the Convention Center. This is, as you know, a prominent location that's visible from the well-trafficked Baltimore Avenue and Steve Elkins Way approach to the building. A call for artist submissions was then made on April 24th, seeking submissions from experienced muralists to submit conceptual designs for a new coastal-themed mural outside of the entry to the Rehoboth Beach Convention Center. We also announced at that time that a stipend of $5,000 would be awarded to the selected artist. The collaboration with the Rehoboth Art League, specifically with Sarah Gantner, who's here, and Nick Sarator is here, is a proactive way for the city in fostering engagement with the community while achieving its overreaching goals, which obviously is to promote the unique character and identity of our city. The mural is going to spark additional creativity. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Nick and Sarah, who are both here, to tell you more about this.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nick Sarator. I'm the Exhibitions Director for Rehoboth Art League. It's been a real joy to work with Mayor Coons and Sharon and Chris and the Communications Committee finding a muralist. We did send out an all call. It was open to members and non-members, and since we are a very large member-based art league, It reached a lot of people through social media, through our website. We had a lot of positive feedback. We had 21 registrants for this, not just from Delaware, but throughout several of the surrounding states. So here we put together a presentation for the committee. It was a tough decision. There was a lot of good art. They're very skilled muralists. And again, they were very excited to be a part of this. So again, it was a tough choice, but we did narrow it down to one. The criteria was to capture the essence of Rehoboth Beach, not just, maybe seagrass or something that's like real generic, but to really capture the heart of this wonderful beach town. And we do believe that this one gentleman was able to capture that in his presentation. His presentation was extremely professional. We could see work prior to seeing the presentation or what he submitted. So here I'd like to show you his work on this monitor. So as soon as that goes up, I'll...
Ann?
Okay, it's Brett Steves. He's from Hammondsport, New York. He has ties to Rehoboth Beach. He vacations down here a lot in the summer since he was a small guy. So he does come back and forth. He is familiar with Rehoboth Beach. Now, the first sample is, it's hard to see, but up in the upper left corner, you can see this one building, how blank it is. It's a little art museum that sits on a fork in the road, and that, to capture attention, is the mural underneath. It has a woodworker inside, and the bottom part is detailed up close sections from that mural. And this building, as you can see up in the upper left corner, is a big brick blank wall. And you can see how the windows are all painted in. There's figures within each window. The murals tells a story. It's more than just a graphic that's on the wall. So we thought his rendition right there and his skill for painting that was quite exceptional. Again, here's another mural that he did. Each compartment in that old building up there depicts some historical moments, probably reflective of the town. And here is his proposal for the wall. Okay, it highlights different things, our sandcastle competitions. So you see I was very familiar with what goes on around here. The dolphins, we got the heron, beach chairs, dollies, the bandstand. He said, keep in mind that this is just put together. His execution will reflect what you have just seen from his previous murals. He's also open to fine tune, which we had him do on certain things. So this is pretty much what the committee had agreed upon, and he was selected to be the artist. See if I have another, there's a rendition with what it will look like. Okay?
Beautiful.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And if any,
I have a question. Is it the appropriate time for that? I think it's beautiful, and I think it'll be such an improvement to the parking lot area. I'm just wondering a little bit from today to getting to the final design. Would you say this is the final design?
it's going to be fine-tuned just a little bit more, but it's pretty much the final design. I would like him to tweak some things on it, like when you look directly into that shell, you have the little girl in front of the water, but to your right, you have a lower horizon line, so I want him to kind of even it out, so it's easy on the eye and it flows better. So it's not two separate things there, as you can see that. Again, the presentations from the artists were, we were glad that they submitted the work that they have done, because when you look at the concept, they had a short time to create something, so we had to take what they did and incorporate it into their ideas on what it will look like. So again, it's going to be completely hand-painted. Brett Steves is, again, he's an expert at this. He says if it takes more than 2 weeks, he'd be surprised.
Will there be a date on it or the artist's name on it?
Absolutely, we can have that done, absolutely. So,
Well done, Nick, and thanks to you and all of your
thank you.
collaborators and Chris's office. What is the timeline you said?
we are looking at if to go forward with the contract, it will start September 15 and be completed by October 1st.
Very nice.
And because of the size of the wall, because of their expertise, it's not going to take a long time. It's a very nice, small, compact wall to work with. And he's pretty efficient. and he's more than happy to come down here anytime to meet everyone and, for his headshot or whatever. So he's a really good guy to work with.
Well, I'm sure we'll be able to introduce him to the commissioners at a public meeting. And also, city attorney is working on an agreement with him, so we have something in writing there. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's great.
Very nice.
Thank you very much, Nick.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. With that, we'll move into the old business, and the first item is further discussion of Grove Park Canal Access and the path forward for the city. There are a
Mayor,
number-
I'm going to recuse myself from this discussion. I think everybody knows that I've been a huge supporter of this effort, and I just don't want to see anyone to, I just think it's just smarter for me to recuse. And I plan to not participate in this discussion nor in the vote following. But of course, I'm very hopeful that this will move forward. Something that's very near and dear to my heart. I think it's going to be a real benefit to the city as far as hopefully lessening traffic. And I look forward to hopefully that it happens. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Matt Spong from Landscape Architectural Services. Based on our meetings with staff in June and the last commissioners meeting on June 10th and a staff meeting last Wednesday, we were asked to add some additional items to the project for maintenance, monitoring of the construction, for the vibration of the pipe, et cetera. I'll get into that right now. Okay, these were the additional items that we all agreed upon during our several meetings. We're going to have our geotech engineer do an analysis of the effect of pile driving on the existing 16-inch water main. And to do that, they will prepare a vibratory monitoring plan, and we've decided to use two types of augers: helical steel piles, which are very small, like 2 3/8 inch diameter, closest to the water main, and they have a very small vibration coefficient. And then we'll have to use the timber piles on the dock piles. And we also have vibratory monitoring during pile driving. It's basically like a seismic monitor. It monitors the number of vibrations per second of the different pile driving equipment. And actually in the vibration monitoring plan, they have a coefficient that this existing cast iron pipe that's approximately 35 years old can withstand without having a negative impact. And they analyze the two types of equipment, which would either be a small auger for the helical piles or a impact hammer for the timber piles. And then they can tell how many vibrations per second it'll have, and that they make sure that it doesn't exceed what the pipe can withstand. And that's also affected by the soil type, which we have from the geotechnical analysis, and by the distance of the piles to the water main. And I'll show you that a little more in detail as we get through this. We also, which we had talked about last time, since the plan was done in 1984 and no as-builts were done, nobody's 100% sure exactly where this water main is, or there's a good estimate based on where the valves are. But with the ground penetrating radar and a hydraulic soft dig, it's like a vacuum that will, once they locate it by the ground penetrating radar, they take this like big vacuum and vacuum out a little bit of soil at a time until they actually reach the top of the pipe, and it won't damage the pipe. So then we can know exactly how deep it is, and then we'll have our surveyor go out and locate all these locations and tweak anything that needs to be tweaked so there won't be a problem. Also in that meeting, there was a suggestion of a little bit of additional planning to the south of between where the project is and the bridge, and then also to the north. There's a couple little areas that were kind of left out, so we added that. And they also felt a drip irrigation system would be helpful, during establishment in the summertime and so forth to reduce maintenance. The police chief recommended some additional security lighting. We're having a photometric analysis done right now to see if we have enough foot candles to do what he needs to do. We're looking at kind of like bollard lights that would light the walkways and the boardwalk. And we also may need to look at a taller pole light that may be on the existing deck from the museum or somewhere that would go on with a motion sensor and so forth for security to make sure there's enough light if somebody's there after hours. They would put up 2 video security cameras, or I guess we're still going back and forth with Max about that, if they need 1 or 2 to adequately monitor the area. It would only be open, dawn to dusk, but this is to monitor it after hours or any time, so the police would know what's going on there. We also added a life ring, 4-foot wide gates at the top, since we already have safety rails and handrails on 2 sides and retaining walls. That'll just help further reinforce that it's closed from dawn to dusk, although as we all know, anybody can jump it if they really want to, but at least it's another option to keep people out. And then we have short-term maintenance. This says 3 years, but it should also say in addition to the 2 years, which is with the base bid contract. And I did hand out an amendment to the things I sent out the other day, which is a draft maintenance schedule, which has every month of the year and what should be done. We've used this on other projects, and it's worked out real well. You'll see on there's power washing twice a year, and then monthly weed control and cleaning the beds and different things like that. Plus, once a year, there'd be a little bit of sand put on the pavers, which is the normal thing to do, especially after you power wash. You have to do a little bit of that, and in case there's any minor settling, which sometimes you have, but that really shouldn't be an issue because we're asking for, went the wrong way, 95% compaction for everything, which is an ASTM standard for specs. And if you monitor that and the compaction equipment used is correct and everything, there shouldn't be any settling of anything. This shows the plan that Kevin discovered last week. As you can see, it's an antique plan done by hand on a blueprint from 1984. So basically, it shows the canal, and the pipe is below the water level, which is, they show 8 feet, which is what our tidal survey showed, that at high tide it's 8 feet. And that and it shows basically on this cross section that all the pipes should be 4 to 5 feet deep. And if that's the case, it really shouldn't be an issue. These show different types of pile driving equipment. We did go to the helical piles on the closest structures, which would be the boardwalk and the pier. In this case, you'll see there's a helical pile. It's just a small auger about 3 inches in diameter. It has a little motor, kind of like what they use to put up fence posts. And this one's being installed under an active 2-inch diameter gas main and a sewer line. So you could tell that they wouldn't allow that to happen because there'd be a chance of sparks or noise or anything, and these guys are right under it. And again, the vibration monitoring plan will make sure that's all okay. And then over here we have a big impact-driven pile, which is done with a crane, and then a vibratory mounted pile driver, which is a smaller hydraulic excavator, which was used on this project down in Milford. That's another picture of this skid loader with the small pile driver. These are the costs that we have been working on since the, I guess, initial project years ago, and then they've been updated last July, and they were updated again in May, and they were updated just last week. So then we have the base bid costs now are $835,603. This is probable cost estimate for additional items requested by commissioners and staff. You see we have the geotechnical analysis and the vibratory control monitoring plan, which I described previously. And then we have 7 days of vibration monitoring during construction. We talked to several of the contractors, a helical pile contractor that we've used and other ones. They say theirs will take 4 to 5 days, and the timber piles, there's less of them, and for the dock. And they say it'll take 1 to 2 days. So we went on the high side of 7 days. Then we have the location of the existing water main with ground penetrating radar and soft dig and backfilling, and the drip irrigation system, additional lighting, video security cameras, life ring in a PVC case, two gates, park rule sign, short-term maintenance after the first 2 years are included. Oh, there's a typo there. That should have been a bracket, not a 9. And, I don't know if you can see this, but basically this top number here shows that the closest timber pile on the dock is now 68.5 feet from the water main. The closest helical pile is the one in this corner is 13.4 feet, and all the rest of them are over 16 feet. And we could probably even get another foot or so out of that if we need to by cantilevering the beam and having the deck go out a little further. But the vibratory monitoring plan will show us that. And as part of this, in the last couple weeks, we also contacted DENREC to make sure there's no issues with our permit, subaqueous permit. And once they agree, the Army Corps always will do the same, and I've been in contact with them as well. To move the whole pier, if you looked at the original plan, this is all moved about 12 feet north to get additional clearance away from the water line. Oops. Well, that's the permit plan I just told you about. And then I got an email from Katie Esposito, who's the environmental scientist, and Tyler Brown, who's the manager. And they said, everything looks like it should be fine. I won't have time to issue the formal addendum for the next couple weeks, but please accept this email for the time being for wetlands and subaqueous lands approval of the modification. Oh, I must be dyslexic. I keep going backwards. This is just a picture of the life ring. They put them in along the Milford Greenway after they had an accident years ago. Somebody dove in the river and didn't know how to swim. So they put them every quarter of a mile or so, or maybe closer. But you know, we only need really one for this location. And you see it's in a case, and there's a rope in there, and there's a life ring, and it's all there if it needs to be done. And then this little graphic just shows a section. Of course, there's actually a rail along there, but we left it off for the clarity, and just shows that we have this area for the kayak rack, which we had talked about initially, but I think the staff wanted to make sure there was some area to hold kayaks. This one will actually hold like 12 kayaks down by the water, so that if the a vendor gets in there, or if it becomes real popular, you don't have a lot of people backing up, walking their kayaks up and down. So just make the circulation better. This is just a preliminary lighting plan, and really hard to see at this scale, but it just shows these little bollard lights that are about every 20 feet, and they're close to the ground, so they give a good lighting on the walkway surface. But again, we might have to put another security light up here on the existing deck outside the museum, and we're getting a photometric analysis of that as we speak, and once we get that, then we'll determine, you know, what size lights we need in terms of wattage and so forth. So that's pretty much all I got. I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you for putting all this together. It's really very helpful. I just have a few clarifications.
Okay.
When you talk about the dawn to dusk timeframe, I don't recall if we've talked before, and you very well may have. Is that a year-round expectation?
Well, I guess it's up to the city once all that can be fine-tuned, but most state and municipal parks throughout the state have a dawn to dusk, opening time. That's a standard.
Yeah, that's technically what Grove Park is at the moment.
So year-round, there would be activity from kayaks, let's say, yes?
Could be.
Could be from dawn to dusk. And then is the water taxi going to be running?
They don't run right now. They only do tours right now, but I'm sure they have special trips that go up and down the canal. But that's probably something for later on, if we look into a water taxi vendor wanting to utilize the dock to drop people off, pick people up.
So,
They do run, obviously, through the spring and fall and the summer, but as it gets colder, they don't run.
so just clarify for me, Mayor, I want to make sure I understand that one of the real benefits of this is hopefully taking some cars off the highway. So the water taxi at the inception of this would be functional or no?
I would.
Or we don't know yet?
We don't know yet, but I would think as we get closer to having the dock, I would think the vendor doing the water taxi would be very interested in it, because they were 10 years ago. But then, because there wasn't a stop in Rehoboth, it became a little bit difficult for them to schedule stops in Rehoboth, and there's no place to drop anybody.
Okay, so just for discussion purposes, if the water taxi vendor would not be interested, then how do I connect the dots that we can get cars off the highway?
Well, first, I think the water taxi vendor would be interested.
More than likely.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, because that's the way it was. But
Okay.
again, as you know, over the years, basically, the city kind of said, no, we're not going to do anything.
Right.
And so they went on to do their other things. But I think, initially, that was the big thought was, hey, here's a way to get some cars off the road, have people come from Lewis all the way down to Dewey, to stop in Rehoboth, maybe utilize the restaurants, drop people off, pick people up. So I think that will come, but I think they need the dock before they will come.
And then, Matt, on the additional $176,000 in costs, who's bearing that cost?
As I understand it, but you may want to have either Mark or Scott address that the LRCIA feels very confident that they could raise the additional money.
So the short-term maintenance for the first 3 years, that will be borne, if all works out correctly, by the organization?
Yes, and from what I understand, but they're both here, so they might want to address that they were thinking of having a friends group that would, like the state parks has them, and so forth, where they would actually have a fund, to do that, in the long term, once everything's up and running. But they could address that, I'm sure.
And
It would be helpful to get an
Anybody?
update in terms of where we are financially and so on.
Good morning, Mark Carter. I'm with the LRCI. A couple quick updates. One, Addressing the maintenance. So the first couple years of maintenance, the campaign that the organization is running is built in a few years of maintenance as well as going above the number, the final number for contingency as well. So you can see on Matt's slide, there was I think it was 15% or so contingency built in on that. So the campaign is looking to raise above and beyond what the number is, so that if there is, something that pops up, or hey, there's a second light post or such, that would be raised. As far as the continuing maintenance at all, one thought process of the group is the group would essentially act as a friends to this project, but the group would also look to work in Lewis, further down, in Dewey, we're looking at possibilities of another type of project in that area, and then ultimately in Milton as well, when Milton goes through its development of the river, long-term piece in their city planning and such. So we would continue on, have annual fundraising that occurs. If we receive a gift that makes sense to say, hey, here's X amount to put in an endowment for Grove Park Access or for another project or such down the road. Another thing too is recently, last week, the bond bill came through as well, as far as state budgeting, and Representative Schwarzkopf was giving $200,000 to this project as well. As the meeting last week, that wasn't the case in the sense that we didn't know that yet. So we didn't bring it up at last Wednesday's staff meeting, but we did get confirmation that there's $200,000 more towards the project. So the project's really almost 2/3 of the way funded through means outside of the city and through the work that the group's been doing on the campaign side.
That's really very helpful because for me, the pivotal parts are the maintenance, which that sounds like a great public-private partnership that y'all are looking at long-term. Well, you're looking at it definitely in the short term and hopefully in the long term.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
I just want to make sure I've got that correct. And then if I'm understanding you correctly, from what you've seen thus far, you're pretty confident that the water main, through additional evaluation, is not going to be prohibitive.
Yes, we worked with Kevin on that. Nobody wants to see anything happen. Let's put it that way. So we're taking all the possible precautions we can. Would you agree with that, Kevin? Or? Yes, I would. Okay.
Kevin, would it be possible for you just to kind of point out the concerns you had and how you've worked with Matt on that? Please.
Sure, thanks, Mayor. Yeah, when we talked with Matt and the folks, clearly the water main was my biggest concern. He's done everything we've asked him to do with respect to accurately locating it first, removing or moving a little bit north, which he did, but most importantly, be able to monitor it during construction so that we can see that if we're getting too much vibration from the impact hammer, that we can then shut that down and do something else rather than learn about it after the fact when the water is spewing into the canal. So we're trying to protect it, which I think he's done everything we've asked him to do.
I'd like to ask a question about the vibration monitors. The boardwalk, we've done a lot of construction and we put in the outfall extensions. We use monitors, and I'm not exactly, I know how they work, but how does it protect the project? In other words, is there something in the contract that says vibrations shall not exceed this level?
I think we'll see that he has a consultant that's going to prepare the vibratory control plan, which will lay out what the acceptable levels are for that type of pipe, that age pipe, and the like. And then as we're monitoring, if we see that approaching it, then we can take whatever steps we would be able to take at that point.
Yeah.
And they also will evaluate the 3 different types of equipment that we showed there on their motors that they normally use. Like we've had submissions from other projects that we'll send to him, and he'll make the evaluation based on those 3 types of equipment that may be used, and we'll decide which ones in the specs that we want to use. And the vibration monitoring plan will say this pipe can withstand. There's a coefficient apparently, which I never knew about, that at a certain K cast iron pipe has that it can withstand. So that this is something that's done by this particular consultant, regularly, and they will take into account that. You can't exceed that vibration during construction.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
So, Mayor, just to put a real fine point, the potential for a vote after this meeting to move forward, could you define or explain exactly what the move forward means?
Well, the move forward would be to allow Matt and his group to start the process of drawing up documents for their bids, and which would take place sometime in the fall, Matt?
Well, we're already on contract to do the preliminary plans and.
Closer to the microphone, please.
Oh, sorry. We're already under contract from the contract of March to prepare the construction drawings, and we're at 50% level now, which is when we had all the staff meetings, which is a normal process in this type of a project. At certain completion levels, you get everybody involved to see if there are any comments, and that's when these different comments come up. So it would basically be to continue on, I guess, on that contract. I guess if the vote is approved today, we would probably have the drawings. We would continue on and contract all these, our geotech to do the vibration control plan, et cetera, and do the ground penetrating radar, blah, 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 do all that. And so we would continue on, and that would probably take us to 100% documents, by early fall. And then if everything went together, the idea would be to bid it then and start construction as soon as after that as the contractor was available, assuming that the costs come in at the estimated cost, which we've had fairly good luck over 35 years, knock on wood, but you never know until you get the bids.
Right.
So does that answer your question, Commissioner Sharp?
I think so. Yes, this information's been very, very helpful to put a real fine point on exactly what's getting approved and how we're doing a lot of due diligence on this.
Yeah, and I appreciate Matt and the LRCIA group in getting together with Kevin and the city staff to take into consideration the points that the commissioners made the last couple of meetings.
Oh, I did have one unanswered, and then I'll stop. On the potential use of the water taxi, if that comes to pass, and with a great high level of probability, would there be revenue from the company for the city?
That I'm not sure. I mean, it would be something to look into how we want to handle it, because, if there's going to be revenue for the city, it would probably be the city allowing the vendor to utilize the dock more so than just a plain dock to drop people off and on. Maybe they could park there for a half an hour or park an extra boat there. But I don't think that's in the process as of yet, until we'd have to sit down with the vendor. I mean, because conceivably, I could see, just publicly, people getting in their boat in Dewey and riding up to Rehoboth rather than getting on the highway and dropping somebody off. But there's no place to park your boats now. But I would think that if there is the possibility of the water taxi vendor to say, yes, I'd like to utilize this, and yes, maybe I'd like to contribute some money to the city, we'd have to provide them with something as well. And maybe that's being able to park there for more than an hour or something like that versus a regular boat not being able to park there. But I think that's down the road.
And that would be a commissioner decision down the road that, whatever companies might be even new and want to do something, that would be at the pleasure, if you will, of the commissioners of how that would work.
It would just be like if somebody came up and said, hey, I want to sell ice cream on the dock.
Right.
We'd have to approve it. We can't just say, oh, yeah, sure, go ahead, give us a few dollars.
Thank you.
Yes, it would be that. Any other questions, commissioners? Well, then, Is there a consensus that we can move forward after this meeting, in our special meeting, to have a vote on the path forward? Yes.
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 All set.
Mayor, I would just add, city staff is here, the IT director, director of public works, the city arborist, the chief, police chief, we were all involved in discussions with Max. If you do have any questions specifically to one of the staff members, because I don't believe they're going to stay for the later meeting, so, but I know that, you know, we've gone round and round with this, and Matt has put together the responses, and everyone is satisfied with that.
Yeah, I think it's wonderfully positive to see that there's been a collaboration and that everyone has been brought in at this point to be on board with it. Thank you for doing that.
Great. All right. Thank you very much, Matt. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And we will move on to the next item on old business, which is continued discussion of the ordinance to amend Chapter 270, Section 270-69, relating to the conversion of infractions of Article VII signs from criminal to civil offenses. If you all remember, we had this discussion before. We set a public hearing for the July 19th meeting. I just put this on the agenda today, just to see if there's any further discussion. Obviously, we'll have a little bit of discussion on the 19th during the public hearing, but the solicitor pretty much so had put together the resolution and the document itself last time. I don't know if you want to say anything.
Yeah, nothing has changed since the last time. Remember, this is just a conversion from criminal citation to a civil citation. You already approved a bunch of other ones throughout the code. This one needed to go to a public hearing because it involves a change to the zoning requirements. But again, it's just as to signs and just as to the sign ordinance under the zoning code, not anything else within the zoning code.
So again, it should be, you know, a pretty simple thing during the hearing, but I wanted to open it up and see if anybody had any specific comments, questions. Otherwise, we'll just put this on for the hearing on the 19th.
I don't have anything.
Anybody? Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thanks, Glenn. Next new business is the discussion of the city's draft small wireless facilities management ordinance and small wireless communications facility design manual. City manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Just making sure Attorney Michael Roberts is still on the phone here.
I am still here, Sharon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So you'll recall that in February, the city signed an agreement with the Cohen Law Group, which Mr. Roberts represents. And since that time in March, we began meeting. The city staff, city commissioners Schlosser and Commissioner Sheffer were involved in those meetings, as well as AT&T and Verizon. We have some of those folks from AT&T, Verizon here. Mr. Joe Divis, we have Mr. Mike Mullen, we have Doug Cowan here as well, and somebody, there's a fourth that I don't know, might be here, but in any case, so this is pretty much has been wrapped up in the 3-month time period that was originally suggested by Mr. Roberts. Also, City Attorney Mr. Mandelis was involved in these fine-tuning of the ordinance. And before you today is the draft ordinance and also the facility design manual, which has been worked on. So, Mike, I don't know if you can just maybe start an intro, provide that to the commissioners and to the public with what we have in front of us.
Absolutely, yeah, and thank you, Sharon, and thank you to the commissioners for having me here. I'd like to start, if we can, with just a brief overview of the applicable law here. There have been some recent changes in federal law that have sort of catalyzed this whole project. So I want to give just a very high-level overview of what is the applicable law as for this ordinance, to give a bit of background before we kind of dive into the substance of it, and I address any questions that the commissioners may have. Does that work for everyone?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the city's base authority here for regulating wireless facilities comes from what's known as the Telecommunications Act of 1996. And what this does is it preserves local zoning authority over the location, placement, and construction of wireless facilities, essentially, generally, which is why, and this is a question that I received from City Attorney Mendelis as well, which is why this ordinance is proposed for placement within the larger zoning ordinance rather than being a standalone ordinance of its own. So the Telecommunications Act preserves this authority subject to a few limitations. Those limitations being that the city cannot unreasonably discriminate amongst functionally equivalent providers, essentially meaning that you have to treat AT&T the same as you treat Verizon, the same as you treat Sprint. We're not allowed to prohibit or have the effect of prohibiting wireless service, and we'll discuss a bit further what exactly that means. But essentially, we can't impose requirements that are so stringent that it's impossible for a provider to comply with those regulations. That would be an effective prohibition, and that standard has been a bit modified recently as well. And we also cannot regulate wireless facilities based on the environmental effects of radio frequency emissions, and this includes the health effects of such emissions. Those are regulated solely by the FCC, so we can only require proof of compliance with those standards promulgated by the FCC. Now, over time, the standards of the Telecommunications Act have been modified by the FCC via FCC order. There are about 3 or 4 major orders, all of which are addressed by the ordinance as drafted now. And I'm not going to go too in depth on each of them, but I do want to talk about the most recent one very briefly. This is September 27th, 2018's third report and order and declaratory ruling. What this did is it established a new type of wireless facility known as a small wireless facility. So traditionally, when we think of wireless facilities, we think of tall towers, whether that be a monopole tower or a guide tower or a lattice-style tower or large antennas attached on top of buildings. We think of large-scale facilities. But in recent times, the industry has shifted towards smaller facilities that are deployed in far greater numbers to address gaps in their capacity of their network. Given that the demand has grown so much in the last decade or so, as I'm sure you all can appreciate as cell phone and computer users, as well as public safety use, there's a number of areas that cause this great demand for wireless service. Providers have shifted towards smaller facilities. So in the third report and order, the FCC establishes what's known as a small wireless facility. This is effectively any wireless facility that features an antenna that is under 3 cubic feet in volume, features additional accessory equipment that is 28 cubic feet or less in volume, or is attached to a utility pole that is either no greater than 50 feet in height or no greater than 10% higher than adjacent utility poles. So after creating this new type of facility, the small wireless facility, and these are termed small wireless communications facilities in the ordinance just for consistency throughout. It also establishes several new requirements for these facilities, which are addressed in the final section of the draft ordinance, as well as the design manual. And these new federal requirements have warranted a bit different of an approach than we may be used to for wireless facilities today. Perhaps most importantly, there are shot clocks, as they are known, that are applicable to applications for wireless facilities. These are essentially time frames in which the city will have to make a decision on an application for the construction of a wireless facility. For small wireless communications facilities, these shot clocks will be 60 days for what's known as a co-located antenna. That will be an antenna that's attached to some pole that already exists or some structure that already exists, and 90 days for applications for small wireless facilities that require the installation of a new pole. And this time frame contains everything from the initial receipt of the application to the point where the applicant is fully ready to construct that facility. And that includes any sort of zoning approval required, permit issuance, any sort of agreement negotiation that may be required beyond the standard level. For example, if they're attaching to a municipally owned facility, everything has to be completed within that time frame, which is why, as I'm sure you saw in your review of the ordinance, there is a separate administrative approval process that has been put in place for these facilities. The order also limits the fees that are able to be recovered for small wireless facilities and establishes what are known as presumptively reasonable fee ceilings. And this is for both initial applications for a small wireless facility as well as for use of the public rights of way. It limits recurring fees to $270 per site per year, and it limits the application fees to $1,000 for an application for a new pole that's required to support a small wireless facility, and $500 for an application for wireless facilities that are being co-located on an existing pole. And one important point to make here on that $500 fee for the co-located small wireless facilities is that $500 covers anywhere from 1 to 5 antennas included in the same application. So it would be $500 for 1, $500 for 2, all the way up to 5, and then it's $100 per additional antenna included in the same application thereafter. The third report and order also establishes a new standard for aesthetic requirements for small wireless facilities, and this standard effectively says that the aesthetic requirements for any small wireless facility particularly, and I'd like to clarify that everything I've said for the third report and order is applicable to small wireless facilities only. Aesthetic requirements for such facilities have to be reasonable, they have to be objective and published in advance, and they have to be no more burdensome than those applied to similar infrastructure providers. The crucial point here to understand as we look at the ordinance and the design manual is the objective and published in advance aspect of this requirement. What that effectively means is that any sort of design requirements that we impose on small wireless facilities, any requirements we have as to how they look or largely where siting occurs, particularly in the case of a pole being replaced, all of that has to be spelled out very clearly within a city document, whether that be the code or in this case, a design manual, and it needs to be, again, published in advance. And that is the idea behind the sort of supplemental design manual that we have here. That contains all of the city's aesthetic requirements for small wireless facilities, thus fulfilling the objective and published in advance aspect of that third report and order. Finally, the order also slightly modified that effective prohibition standard that I mentioned earlier. It now considers that to mean anything that materially inhibits the provision of wireless service. This is kind of the lens through which we had to look at this entire project to ensure that we weren't imposing any sort of requirement that was materially inhibiting the ability for providers to provide service to residents of the city. Obviously, that's a very important service to provide. Our goal was to encourage the provision of wireless service while also regulating that provision so that it is done in a responsible manner, in a manner that preserves the character of the community. So that's a brief overview of the applicable law here. We can jump in now to the ordinance itself, but I want to take a pause to see if there are any questions on what we've talked about so far.
Okay, we're good, Mike.
Oh, good? Okay. So with that said, I want to dive into the ordinance itself. I want to give, again, sort of a high-level overview of how the ordinance is constructed, how it will operate, and why it operates the way that it does, after which I'm happy to answer any questions that the commissioners may have. So the ordinance itself is, as mentioned, located within the larger zoning code, given that preservation of local zoning authority via the Telecommunications Act. If we look at the definitions that are included in the ordinance, the large majority of these, at the very least, the most important ones come directly from federal law verbatim, and we've ensured that every definition that has a counterpart in federal law is defined exactly as such in order to ensure that the city is complying with the applicable law. Moving on from the definitions, the ordinance itself is really divided into three main sections, and those three sections correspond with a specific type of wireless facility. First, we have non-tower wireless communications facilities. What these will be are antennas that are attached or co-located to some existing structure, and these antennas would not meet the definition of a small wireless communications facility. And this could be a number of different types of facility. In the context of the city, these will be largely facilities that are attached to the water tower or are attached to some other existing tower-based facility that are not small facilities because they're required to cover a larger area than a small wireless facility. For these facilities, they will go through the typical special exception process via the board. And as you will see in the ordinance you have in front of you, there's very comprehensive requirements for these that are largely mirrored for each type of facility. Again, separating out the small wireless communications facility, but we have requirements for the design of these facilities, where they are permitted to be located, ensuring that they comply with all other applicable requirements of the city code and are processed in accordance with the procedures that the city has in place currently. As a general matter, our goal in crafting this ordinance was to ensure that it would work seamlessly with what the city already has in place. We didn't want to simply drop in a sort of one-size-fits-all ordinance and require the city to sort of work backwards to comply with that. So we took a great deal of care in ensuring that all of the requirements of the ordinance tie back when necessary to other areas of the code or other well-established city processes. There are comprehensive safety requirements for each type of facility as well. This includes requirements for adherence to national safety codes that are applicable to any operators or constructors in the industry, compliance with wind and ice requirements. We want to ensure that in the event of a heavier load for these facilities in the winter, when there's ice caked on them, we want to ensure that they are structurally sound in sort of those inclement weather conditions. We want to ensure compliance with aviation safety, with, again, the radio frequency emissions requirements of the FCC, and we require that proof of compliance with those RF emission standards be submitted with the application for any wireless facility. We include insurance requirements for each type of facilities, with the amount differing for whether it is a non-tower based or a tower based facility. Obviously, if in the case of a large tower, we want to ensure that there is a larger insurance policy in place, as any sort of issue from those facilities could be on a larger scale than those for simply a co-located antenna. We have maintenance requirements. We have the approval requirements. If we look on page 8 of the ordinance, timing of approval, that's subsection P. Those are the shot clocks that I mentioned earlier that come from the FCC orders. For large towers and non-small facilities, the applicable shot clocks are 90 days for a co-located antenna and 150 days for a new tower. We also have additional requirements for non-tower WCF that are located within the public rights-of-way. These facilities would be rare given the newly distinguished small wireless facility, but we do want to ensure that the ordinance will address any type of installation that the city could possibly see in its own section, so you're able to receive an application and point exactly to where in the code that application must comply and the process therefore. Next, we have the tower-based wireless communications facility, and this starts on page, at least of my draft, page 13, subsection B. These will be what we all think of when we think of a traditional cell tower. They're large scale, they're intended to cover a wide area, and they are most frequently located on a private lot outside of the public rights-of-way. These, again, will go through the special exception process, and there are, if you look in subsection B, specific requirements for what must be included in an application for a tower-based wireless facility. One point that remains open for these facilities is the district designations for where tower-based WCF are permitted. If you look on page 17 of my draft, it is subsection B2A2. The tower-based WCF section permits tower-based facilities on a district-by-district basis. So we would want to designate specifically which districts allow for these facilities. Again, a number of the requirements that are in the non-tower WCF section are also echoed here, whether that be the insurance requirement, whether that be compliance with applicable safety codes. We obviously want any and all wireless facilities to be constructed safely and responsibly and comply with any applicable code that is in place for such facilities. There are additional requirements in place for tower-based facilities. As you can imagine, by virtue of being a large tower outside of the public rights-of-way, we want to ensure that these facilities are screened to the extent possible to make them as visually unobtrusive as we can. We want to make sure that they're fenced in for safety. There are additional Federal Aviation Administration requirements that are in place for tall wireless facilities like this or the tower-based facility. There are lighting requirements, all of this being contained within the ordinance here as well. Again, we have the timing of approval, and I keep bringing up the timing of approval and shot clock issues here because it is something that the city will need to be cognizant of in the context of any wireless facilities application. You really want to make sure that you are in compliance with these shot clocks. As for traditional facilities, the remedy is that the application is deemed approved if the city goes beyond that shot clock time frame. So for example, for a new tower-based wireless facility on day 151, technically the applicant could say our application has been deemed approved due to inaction by the city. Finally, we have, and I'm going to focus on this section as well as, again, this will likely be what the city sees most frequently, and that is the small wireless communications facilities section. On my draft, it begins on page 20. It is subsection C. What these facilities will mostly be are facilities within your public rights-of-way, again, attached to utility poles, and they are deployed, again, in larger numbers than a traditional cell tower would be because their coverage radius is so much smaller than a traditional cell tower. So as I mentioned a bit earlier, the shot clocks for these facilities are very short, 60 days for a co-located antenna and 90 days for a new pole. And again, unlike the traditional facilities, the small WCF shot clocks contain every action that the city has to take from receipt of the application to the provider's ability to construct. So with that in mind, and then this is product of quite a bit of discussion between myself and city staff, we've chosen to go with an administrative approval process via the Building and Licensing Department rather than a traditional special exception kind of discretionary zoning process. And there's a few reasons for this, not least of which, again, being the very short shot clock timeframes, as I'm sure you all can appreciate, given that you are intimately involved in the special exception process. With notice requirements and hearing requirements, it can be difficult to operate within such a strict time frame, especially as a 60-day time frame for co-located antennas. But also, given that the requirements for small wireless facilities need to be so objective, again, as I mentioned, objective and published in advance is the standard for aesthetic requirements. Given that there is not a great deal of discretion that the city is able to exercise on the small wireless communications facility application, the special exception process really loses its efficacy when imposed on a small wireless facility. So with both of those issues in mind, and again, product of quite a bit of discussion, we felt that the administrative approval process would be best. And the way this would work is an application is submitted to the Building and Licensing Department and is then reviewed for essentially as a checklist for compliance with both the small WCF requirements of this ordinance as well as those in the small WCF design manual here as well. And again, we wanted to ensure that this is all in accordance with the city's typical process. So we had discussions as to where the best department would be to review these applications, et cetera. And we've come to the process that you have before you now. And then beyond that, again, we have the requirements that are in place for every type of facility, given that the small WCF specific requirements are largely contained within the design manual. So we want to make sure, again, that these facilities are being installed safely and in compliance with applicable industry codes as well as federal law. We want to ensure compliance with, again, radio frequency emissions. I know this can be a concern for residents frequently, and it may be a concern for some of you as well. So we want to ensure that all applicants are proving compliance with those standards of the FCC. We point in the ordinance itself to the design manual as containing all of the design requirements for small WCF. And then again, we have the shot clock timeframes in here as well, as established by federal law. You'll see also in each section for facilities within the public rights of way, there is language reserving the city's right to recover fees that will reimburse the city for its costs associated with these facilities. And these will be, again, as I mentioned, they will be capped by the FCC order at the amounts I mentioned earlier, but we do point to those specifically within the ordinance itself. And then if we turn now to the design manual, that is the supplemental document here. Again, this document contains effectively all of these small WCF specific requirements, particularly when it comes to the aesthetics of these facilities, which tends to be a great concern for municipalities, and particularly a municipality like the city, where aesthetics are incredibly important, especially given your tourism industry. You want to make sure that everything looks as good as it possibly can here. So that was our goal in creating this design manual as well. And you will see in here, there are general standards for all small facilities, and then there are standards for each specific type of equipment associated with a small wireless facility. There are standards for the antenna itself. There are standards for the accessory equipment associated with the antenna. That will be anything from switches to power supplies to emergency shutoffs. The facilities frequently will enclose this equipment within an equipment shroud, which is typically the most aesthetically pleasing version of this accessory equipment, and there are standards for wiring as well. Effectively, we want to ensure that there is no exposed wiring to the extent feasible, whether that be contained within conduit or U-guard, whatever the case may be there. We don't want simply wiring hanging off of an antenna on a pole. And then in section 3 of the design manual, there are standards for new poles, whether that be a replacement pole or a new pole entirely at a location where there was no pole to date. Replacement poles, effectively, we want to make sure that they are going to match the pole that is being replaced, as well as nearby poles, to ensure that a pole installed for a small wireless facility doesn't stick out like a sore thumb or is of a completely different design or material. And we want to make sure that they're being installed in the effectively the same place that the original pole was installed, as well as being capable of accommodating all of the uses attached to that original pole. And then for new poles, again, we want to ensure that they are of a similar design and material as nearby poles, and we want to ensure that they are installed in places that make sense within the city. So if you look at on page, I believe it is page 6, the manual, it is the very last page, subsection C, we ensure that no new poles are being installed directly in front of any building entrance or exit so that it would interfere with ingress or egress, within 10 feet of the edge of any driveway, in the public rights of way directly opposite of any driveway, or in any way that is otherwise in violation of the design standards of the design manual. Our goal with this section was to ensure, number one, that the poles are being installed safely. As you can imagine, placing these very close to the edge of a driveway would interfere with vehicular sight lines or pedestrian sight lines, and we wanted to avoid that as best possible. So that's a base overview of the design manual as well. If you look at the approval process contained in section 4, there is an opportunity for applicants to propose an alternate design that does not strictly comply with those standards of the design manual to be approved and considered on a case-by-case basis, at which point those approved designs will be kept on file at the Building and Licensing Department or future applicants to reference as to what is acceptable to the city. So our goal here is, again, to have a very straightforward process. You may think it is less straightforward given the amount of time I've just talked, but we want everything to be as straightforward as possible and as understandable as possible, and to comply or agree with the existing city requirements and processes that you have in place. So with all of that said, I welcome your questions and we'll respond to them as best I can. I'd like to make actually one final point before we do that, and that is, I believe, Commissioner Schlosser's comment that I saw this morning as to cybersecurity language being included in the ordinance. That was not included in this latest draft, as I was under the mistaken impression that it was still being discussed, but it has been added currently in a new draft that will incorporate any of our discussion today as well. So at this time, I welcome any questions you may have.
This is Commissioner Mills. I've got a minimal background in wireless. My experience has largely been looking around different boardwalk towns, seeing what they have, and working with the city manager and mayor with one wireless vendor in town and looking at what happens with them. And first of all, I'd like to say I've read every word of this. My comprehension may not be 100%, however, it's a long read and very technical. I would like to remind the public that the document that's being referenced is embedded in the agenda. If you go online, you will be able to see everything that we're looking at. I would like a Word version of this and do some red line comments and forward them to the city manager and city solicitor for them to look at, rather than consume everybody's time here with nitpicks or questions or whatever. And I think that will help expedite things a little bit. But one of the things I guess I feel is that since my comprehension isn't 100% on this, is more to forward to the city manager and the city solicitor what my concerns are, and then have them be the experts on this document to see whether those are fulfilled in the document or not. For instance, some of my concerns from the beginning have been proliferation of these units, number one. Number two, could proliferation be managed by co-location? One of the vendors that I've worked with said they were unwilling to co-locate with anybody else. And so that ended that conversation. Number three, aesthetics. Now, aesthetics for me deals with height. For instance, we had one proposal for tower pole in the residential area that exceeded our residential height limits. How can we do better there and prevent that? The other thing with, again, with aesthetics goes to proliferation. The fewer, the better. But aesthetics also goes to the design and looks of the poles. In Ocean City, Maryland, if anybody's been down there, they've got these individual wireless units that at the base, they're about a 3-foot diameter cylinder, the height of a drum. And then from there, they go up like a light pole. But to me, they're ugly, and they're big, and they're frequent down the boardwalk. Could they have been put on one side, west side, and help diminish or improve the aesthetics? I don't know. But that's an important thing. There was one pole installed in town where we were told that the wireless provider was going to replace it with one in kind by the same manufacturer, just a little taller. And they ended up aborting on that and manufacturing one. Now, the manufactured one may look fine to some people, but my concern is when you start allowing every vendor to design their own pole, that we're going to have a mishmash citywide. And so, again, proliferation, co-location, aesthetics are some of my big things.
I have a couple of things. So in the design manual, that section about new utility poles shall be installed in accordance with the predominant pattern of existing structures, and then C, to the extent technically feasible, no utility pole shall be installed, and then there's 4 different things: in front of a building entrance, within 10 feet edge of a driveway, public's right-of-way, violation of the design standards contained herein. For our particular situation, I would have liked to seen, basically, we don't want any poles constructed on the boardwalk. I mean, co-location on light poles is one thing, but I'm not real comfortable with adding more poles to a boardwalk. So I'd like to see that added. So the poles in excess of 50 feet are 10% higher than the whatever structure is around. I don't know that I'm totally comfortable with that, because we could be talking about anywhere, like, again, in the residential area, that could be, I think, a problem. Not knowing how these small wireless communication facilities really work, or how they need to be situated in order to have the type of service that's needed, I'm just hazy on that. One other thing, there was a reference to noise. Is there noise associated with these WCFs?
So the noise is typically going to be limited to the tower-based facilities, and that will be related to backup generators or generators. Those are the primary noisemakers. For a small wireless facility, no. I mean, there's not going to be humming antennas on utility poles on the boardwalk or anything along those lines.
I think lastly, well, it may not be last, maybe last for now. I don't see anywhere there's a maximum for the tower height. Is there? Did I miss that?
So the tower height, let me hunt it down here. That is on page 18, subsection B1, a maximum height of 150 feet.
It's also in the definitions on page 3 under item 13, small wireless communications facility. It gets a little more granular as well. If I'm correct, that's Mike speaking, right?
So, but the 150 feet is specifically for the tower. What towers do we currently have? I mean, I know we have wireless on top of the water towers and things like that, but do we have any standalone towers anywhere?
Well, we've got,
That's that height?
AT&T has one on one of the 4 recreation lights on the boardwalk. They have one located within a cupola that sticks up through the cupola at the Delaware Avenue restrooms. They've got one on the southwest corner of Wilmington and First in front of the market. They have one in front of the post office in the median on Rehoboth Avenue at Second. They have one in the median on Rehoboth Avenue at the easternmost end of the median. And what else?
What are those?
5.
That's 5.
And those heights are approximately, do we know?
The one at the one at the southwest corner of Wilmington and First is, I think, 35 feet.
Oh, okay. I mean, my concern are that when we start talking about things over 50 and the 150-foot tower, that's the one for me. That's problematic.
Any idea what the towers are on Rehoboth Avenue?
Do you know that, Max? As far as up here? Yes.
Rehoboth Avenue.
Can you come to the microphone?
I think Commissioner Mills is speaking regarding the small cell facilities, and the 150-foot height level limit is for the large tower facilities. So, but I think I want to say our water tower is 180 feet. So, regarding the small cell facilities that we have existing now, I think 35 feet is probably the largest. So.
Okay. Thank you. That helps.
I want to thank everybody who helped participate in this and gave us feedback throughout the process. There is a bit, Sharon, you can correct me if I'm wrong, not to rush into something, but I do believe we have a little bit of a time constraint on getting something in place based on the new FCC regulations. Is that accurate?
Well, not only that, yes, that's accurate, but also we have folks waiting in line, if you will. So at the end of the season, I know Verizon's coming right back with a permanent structure for the water tower here on 2nd Street. And I have been in discussions with AT&T as well for Verizon for additional small cell sites. So it's been, happening here since February and March, and sure, I think at least by August, it would be beneficial to get this underway.
I also understand that from the aesthetics standpoint that I know everybody's concerned with, as was I, that up to now, basically, so there's the big towers, right, that are existing right now, and what mainly this is going to be is addressing is the small cells, which are very dense and placed lower and can be placed on existing structures or structures that have a good design. For example, there's already one installed on Rehoboth Avenue where they replaced an existing light structure with a small cell platform, if you will. And is everybody aware of that or know where that is on Rehoboth Avenue? That's already been installed. So, pardon me, there's two. So I just want to hear Sharon's perspective or the vendors or whoever wants to weigh in, Max, that it seems to me that relative to the aesthetics, the providers are willing and have come up with a design for new light poles that'll host these small cell receivers that'll fit into the city, into what's on Rehoboth Avenue. And in fact, actually, at I think no cost to the city, will actually upgrade our lighting structures, both on the boardwalk and on Rehoboth Avenue. So I think I'm accurate in that, and I think there's actually some pictures of what those would look like on both Rehoboth Avenue, other locations, and on the boardwalk. Does somebody want to address that, or can we open it up to the any of the vendors that have made proposals, or excuse me, providers? I just think it's really important to understand that we're not just talking about putting 50-foot poles out there. We're actually talking about making an investment into our city aesthetically. So,
good morning, commissioners. My name is Joe Divis. I'm with AT&T, and I just want to echo Commissioner Schlosser's comment that it's really been a very good, freewheeling discussion, shall we say, in the product that your vendor, your outside counsel provided really was the basis for all of this, and really we just, some of the nuances is what we discussed. But with respect to small cells, one of the reason we need small cells at this point is because of the huge use of wireless by your constituents, our customers. It really is customer based. For AT&T alone, we've seen a 470,000% increase in mobile data traffic in the last 12 years. So think of Route 1, all right? How do you get traffic off Route 1? You have lanes that get off. You know, that's what small cells essentially are if you're talking a highway, it's off ramps to allow that traffic to move at speed. The spectrum that we use, we're getting more spectrum, that increases the lane, so to speak. With respect to small cells in particular, yes, there's designs, multiple designs. What we've done in Rehoboth, I think, as I drive down, if I'm not looking for them, I don't see them. You have those beautiful decorative lamps, and we work very hard to make them basically look as identical as you can, with adding a little bit of space for the wiring, which is all internal again. And we hear loud and clear that when we are doing a small cell, you know, make it, you know, situationally specific. If it's a utility pole, that's a different design than it would be for a decorative pole. And the ordinance and the design manual speak to that. So I think the staff and your outside counsel and your solicitor have done a good job to protect the city interests while also giving us the runway to invest in the city's infrastructure. This really is about infrastructure, just like what you're talking about, what you talked about with the Canal Park and things of that nature. Connectivity, moving information is an important part of our infrastructure, just like highways, bridges, sewage treatment, you know, water, things like that, electric. So, you know, I think we do have to distinguish between a small cell and a macro. The small cell's 50-foot limit. And really, you don't want them that high anyway, because they're really only going to cover a small area, and it's all about capacity, handling that additional traffic from a macro site that is somewhere in the distance. Hopefully that helps.
I think you've shown a willingness, and hopefully I think the design standards, I want to go back to the aesthetics, everything else is valid too, you said, to invest in upgraded light fixtures, decorative lamps, et cetera. So I hope that continues. And Sharon, do you feel pretty confident that will continue based on your work with the providers at this point.
Yes,
it seems
absolutely.
to me.
I don't know that we're ever going to, Joe, if you can just hang out for a couple seconds. I don't know if we're going to be able to address Commissioner Mills' concerns about proliferation and co-location. Can you just comment on the co-location aspect of
Well,
that?
yeah, I will say a couple things. One is at this point, there are really 4 facility-based providers. While there are more competitors in the market, most of them, whether it's Cricket, Metro PCS, things like, they resell our service. So you really only have 4. You have Verizon, AT&T, Sprint, and T-Mobile that are actually facility-based wireless providers. You have vendors that do infrastructure, and they do infrastructure for us. They actually build, they will site and build the stuff, but we are the ones that provide. So we are the ones that actually need the antennas to provide service, so to speak. Sometimes it's a matter of, if with a small cell, with a macro cell, you can put distance between, say, AT&T antennas and Verizon antennas so that they don't interfere with each other. On a small cell, you put those radios too close together, you're going to have interference. So you're almost defeating the purpose of putting them in. So co-location can mean a couple things. One, co-location on an existing structure, something that is there, a decorative lamp, a utility pole, or co-location in the context of a macro is where you put multiple provider antennas on the same structure. But there, again, you can put distance between those, which then negates or limits any potential interference. When you get the antennas too close in a small cell, if you're talking only a 3-foot or less, canister like this, you're asking for a difficulty. So that's where I think the term co-location can be used in a multitude of ways. What we look for is there an existing structure that we can use? Because the location for a small cell is really very network driven, and it's driven by the consumer use of the service and where we need to offload some of that traffic. So so if there's something there, we are willing, ready, and able to use that.
Commissioner Schlosser, you mentioned the idea of new light poles. I know you've worked very closely with all of this, and so have you seen these? Can you?
There's 2 installed on Rehoboth Avenue right now.
Okay.
I think they're nice. They fit in. They fit in with the overall theme of the rest of the light poles, and I think Mary, you've seen them too. So I think they're nice. I think they're really nice.
Are we doing LED type lights on the, or some?
Do the new ones have LED lights? I know the older ones do not, the existing
Are they
structures, but do the new structures have
compact
LED?
fluorescence or any kind of
Good question.
power saving?
A great question.
Yeah, I think there's a couple fundamental things that we can't overlook. One is that the FCC rules are written in such a way that we have very limited recourse. The fact that Sharon and her team have gotten out in front of this to have an ordinance drafted is actually great protection for the city. Absent this type of ordinance, we would be subject to possible behavior that would be unacceptable to the city. So I commend everybody who's been involved in this process of looking at maintaining and preserving the look that we want to have while being open to the wireless facility rules that could steamroll us if we're not careful. I think the other thing is that what we're talking about within Rehoboth is pretty much the small wireless facilities and not the towers that we see out on the highway. And if somebody, Sharon, if you could address this, or if somebody else could address this, because I think there's a concern about height of towers that may not truly be applicable for the city limits that we're talking about.
So this is all about small cell sites, and if you'll recall, when we first had this discussion last year, AT&T came in with those 5 sites shortly, and they were, as Commissioner Mills just pointed them out, all 5 of them out. Shortly after that, we had the cell on wheels that we started 3-4 years ago when we were still in the trailers, and then that morphed into the following year that wasn't enough, so they put these temporary, this was Verizon, I believe, yes, Verizon. So they put on the, with IT's help, with Max's help, the rings around the water tower, and this is the second summer that Verizon has those rings around the water tower. Verizon is requesting, as I said, a permanent agreement with the city to install their permanent infrastructure on those water towers, so you'll be seeing that soon. And then right after that, we talked about, which never happened, some other smaller businesses that wanted to come in here. So this is the culmination, I think, of all of those discussions, because the commissioners requested that we take a step back and somehow come up with an ordinance, which is what we did in working with Glenn and Mike Roberts from the Cohen Group, and that addresses this. So as Joe Divis just pointed out, the multitude of users and people coming to the beach with not only their mobile devices and their cell phones, their laptops in some cases, their iPads, you know, there's more and more and more, watches. So that's the reason that we have this outreach for small cell sites. It's certainly not going to get any less, and this, you know, design manual and the draft ordinance addresses that. So, yes, to answer your question, I think, you know, we've worked collaboratively, inclusively with the big players, Verizon and AT&T, and that was very helpful in putting this ordinance together.
And the demand for service is going to drive the number of small wireless facilities that we're going to need. So that also benefits the residents as well as people who come into town.
Sure.
I want to add on to that. I think we started right in with the compliance, the ordinance, but the fact of the matter, this is an opportunity for really much better service overall for content provision. Sorry, I'm using techie words, but for additional content providers in Rehoboth. Right now, we have one content provider you can go to for your cable, your TV, your internet, basically. What this will do, this will open up the door for us to have competition in town as well for faster internet speeds. I was surprised to learn Rehoboth isn't even in the top 5 cities in terms of internet speed as of the past few years. I mean, small towns and larger towns are more than that. So this will benefit us significantly, and by Sharon and her team taking the lead and putting this ordinance, I think we're the first city to do so under the new FCC regulations. So we're really going to set the stage for what can be done. Just 2 things, and I don't know if these will be based on comments from a couple of the commissioners here. One, in terms of the decorative, the decoration type lamps and streetlights, it would be nice to have a visual you can share with the group on what we're thinking about for both the Rehoboth Avenue, other locations, and the boardwalk. I think it'd be good to share what this looks like with the group. And then secondly, Commissioner Cluzy brought up an outstanding point. We are moving towards LED lighting. I don't know if we should actually include something along those lines in the design standards, or anyway, I just ask you to look at it and ask Mike to look at how we can incorporate that type of feature into the design standards, since that's what we're moving towards. But other than that, I think you've done a great job, and I can't wait to get this up and running so I have options in the future for my content and internet speed.
Another benefit that we gain from this is not only do we kind of control our own destiny, so to speak, in how this is implemented, but it also helps law enforcement and emergency services as the faster speeds become available, they can be much more responsive. So it's a win-win on many fronts. And I think just based on my personal involvement in the process, I've been impressed by the collaboration that has occurred in trying to take a fairly complicated number of elements to wireless communication and work with us. And Sharon has a number of experienced people who have been on point, with Max being the primary IT expert. And so I feel very comfortably with how this has been developed, and to protect us within the limits of the current regulations.
No, I can just say that I'm very pleased to see that we're out in front as a city on this. And I think my concerns and my interests and questions have already been brought up. But thank you for all of you that have brought your expertise to work on this, Max and your team, and the collaboration among the vendors and the city manager. Thank you.
Great. All right, so I guess the next step would be to, at the next meeting, maybe the 19th, we would set a public hearing for as early as the August meeting.
That's right, Mayor. Because it's a zoning change, it won't need to go to public hearing. Typically, you do it through a resolution. If you need to expedite it, there may be a way that you can set the hearing date. Well, today's a workshop, so you couldn't do it today. So yeah, that'd be the next step, is to set the public hearing at the regular meeting.
So Ann, can you put that on the agenda for the 19th? It would be to set a public hearing to, and what section is it? This 270 dash?
It's 270 dash, well, there's a couple of sections that are amended, but 46 point, 270 dash.
Maybe you can work with
I will
Ann,
work with Ann, yep.
Ann to
Yep.
get it on the agenda.
Yeah, I think there's two sections that are actually modified.
I'm sorry, can the public hearing be on the 19th? I have a little concern that,
30 days to set a public hearing.
Have to advertise.
is there,
Advertise,
okay,
because it's a zoning change.
oh,
That, so that's all we
Okay,
need to do
thank
for
you.
that?
Yep.
Okay, great.
Will you send me this in Word?
Yeah, certainly. Mike, we can have that in Word as well, with the latest change for the cybersecurity.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll send it to you as soon as we get off here today.
Okay, great. And we'll, Ann Womack, the city secretary, will coordinate with you just to make sure you're available for that public hearing.
Okay.
Great. Anything else? Could you save it for the public hearing? Excuse me, could you save it for the public hearing, or is it very important it has to happen today?
So what comes back is ready to go, so you have some items.
All right, please, please try to keep it to 3 minutes.
Keep it short. Walter Birmingham, 123 Hennepin Avenue. Because of demonstrated experience in Rehoboth and trying to make, which is an outstanding presentation from what you all put together, and the gentlemen, wherever they are in the world, and the pages that we have are not numbered the same as you have. But in section 2, it talks about electrical inspection to determine compliance with NFPA. That's fine, but there ought to be a required inspection for the electric service by an inspection agency approved by the city of Rehoboth Beach, and a separate electrical inspection for the connected equipment that is put on by the contractor or other people. The same inspection agency approved by the city of Rehoboth Beach, because you have facilities in place with the existing construction of cell site that do not comply, and maybe it will stop having a problem. Under definitions in the manual, under 5, prior approved design, and then at the bottom in section 4 in paragraph 3, I think that's kind of vague. If there's a prior inspection, or excuse me, prior approved design, it needs to be better worked into section 4, which appears on page 12 of our paperwork, and that's just my observation. I also think very well-prepared document. But so many of you folks sitting up there don't see any of this stuff. And I think before these towers are approved, these sites are approved with pictures, shop drawings, these final approvals need to come back that the public, all of you can see what's being proposed in your neighborhood. And I also, in respect, there's a comment in there about the person that's going to approve this. I think it's on page 13. But it talks about the city enforcement officer. And I think that needs to have a definition. Because I think our city enforcement officer, as most people think about it, might be Dennis. Is he the city enforcement officer, the city manager?
He's the code enforcement officer.
I think there need to be a better definition that it shall be a building inspector, the building inspector, or someone that you appoint to do these. There needs to be a person that has continuity and that they need to be educated to what happens so we don't have legal problems. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much on the phone as well as Joe. Appreciate your comments here.
Joe, Mike, and Doug, yes. And thank you, Michael Roberts. Thanks for hanging out with us this morning from Pittsburgh, and we'll check in with you for the hearing date.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move right into commissioner comments. Any?
In the interest of time, I'll just mention
Oh,
we have
I'm
a
sorry.
meeting. Yes.
I
Bandstand.
apologize.
It's okay. Just in
Moved
the
to
interest
B,
of
the
time,
bandstand.
I'll give a more thorough update next time. Just we have a meeting today at 1. Our focus areas will be on putting together some proposed rates for weekdays at the convention center and also looking at a potential convention center strategy for where we want to be with the convention center in the future. That's today at 1 o'clock. Thank you, Mayor.
Do you want to put that, a further update on the next meeting?
That'd
or-
be great. Thank you.
All right. And could we just put that on to for the 19th, please? Thank you. Sorry about that. Now we can move to commissioner comments. Any commissioner comments?
I sent Sharon a note on this, but I just noticed that on the, or a couple people brought to my attention on the city code, we've not updated the new changes to our voting, particularly residency requirement to be eligible to vote. So I just would suggest maybe we make those updates, number one, and number two, that we highlight in that update that you put regarding voting that the changes that have been made, specifically folks can register now, 30 days in advance as opposed to 6 months. That's a really big change. And the online code still reflects the old language and the old requirements. So hopefully we can get that updated and maybe highlight those changes again on the front page of the website, because there's just a few more days to register. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you work with Ann on that?
I will,
Glenn?
yep.
That'd be great.
Taking a note now, thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments? If not, just future meeting dates. Again, we're going to have a town hall on the rate study group on Saturday, the 13th at 10 a.m. And then our regular meeting will be the 19th at 3 p.m. And if there's nothing else, this meeting will be adjourned. Yes.
There was a citizen comment section. I didn't think we got to that.
Oh, I'm sorry. There's, under new business and old business. I apologize.
Hi, Kent Swartz, 6 Stokely Street, on the cell tower discussion we were just having. From what I heard, and I recall this all started with a presentation by one of the vendors where they came in and they needed to put these several sites, these 5 sites, and they showed some diagrams about a half a year ago. And I believe one was in the middle of maybe Bayard near a thing, and one was at the end of the beach block. I think it was Stokely Street, which definitely got my attention. And it was smack dab in the middle as you approached the beach. From there, we came to, let's talk about an ordinance for this stuff so it doesn't get out of hand. We've got to treat everyone fairly. It sounded like today that this ordinance is being drafted is extremely limited because the FCC obviously has I don't know if they really wrote that or they just stamped it, but the carriers have determined that this is what they need to do. And I think it's great. I agree that we need these services. However, because of the timeframes they put in, this is now just going to the zoning department, is what I'm hearing. They're gonna have to approve this, because there's not gonna be any time to go from meeting to meeting and show the public in a public hearing and look at the designs and all that with these small tower sites. Therefore, it sounded like the only thing we have left here is the design manual itself. And the design manual as proposed, I heard about 4 points: not near a driveway, not near a public entrance, and things like that. There's nothing that I heard, except Commissioner Mills said, don't we need to look at this and make sure that they're not, all over the boardwalk? They need to be near the boardwalk. And then we went to, well, they can be on existing light poles. But then we heard that there are at least 4 main carriers that are gonna probably wanna do this stuff, and they can't coexist on the same pole. So we have no standard. We could have a new light pole brought in here, and the next light pole will be different because that vendor needs to be on it, and the next one, and the next one. I really don't hear anything specific for our city about the design, these design standards. They were very brief, they were very broad, and I don't know what our limitations can be, but I implore the city commissioners to take a look at that design manual and say, can we not approve these things at the end of the beach block, and can we not have different light poles every other? I think there might have been something that may restrict that. But hopefully my point's taken in that if it can't be on a light pole and every vendor's got to do it, then they can come to town and say, we are gonna stick it in the middle of Bayard, we are gonna stick it at the end of Stokely Street. And there's really nothing we can do about it unless it's in the design standard. Seems like that was the only control that the city would have left in this. Thank you.
Right. I'd like to
you, Ken.
respond real quick. The 2 poles you mentioned at the boardwalk at the end of Stokely and the one in Bayard, I think it's at Newcastle, in the median there. I put a pause on those because they were exceeding 35 feet to begin with, and I think they came back with a proposal for 35 feet or so. Reread this article. From my understanding, this ordinance says that now those can be up to 50 feet tall. So here I'm upset that they're 35 feet tall in a residential area, and yet 50-foot tall, I think is exceptional, and yet that's what's proposed, so.
And all we'd have left is perhaps the design on that, or to say we can't have it in the sight line of our beach, they've got to be on a light pole, something like that. I'm not hearing that in that current proposed design manual. So again, I implore you all to look at that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, this meeting is adjourned.
Mayor.
Yes.
Walter Burnham, 123 Hanopen Avenue. At the presentation by the Water and Sewer Rate Structure Committee to report to the commissioners, at the end of the meeting, it was approximately 11:10 in the morning, at which point the meeting was adjourned. A few minutes after that, the doors were locked. God help you walk out of the room and leave your camera, your briefcase, or anything else. The commissioners were in the room, the residents were in the room, committee members were in the room. It was one opportunity to ask questions and talk to some of you or one another, because we can't expect answers typically, but it's rude. And as long as people are in here, the lights should not be turned on. It's not lunchtime, and nobody complained. You can do better.
Thank you, Walt.
Now we will move right into the following meeting, which is... Okay, all right. Why don't we take 5 minutes or so? Thank you.